As we discussed in part 2 of Anthology of Houses series about maturing of an earlier experimentation. In part 3, we shall discuss the variations of modernist manifestos, bold tectonic operatives, and complex formal architectural discourses that has influenced the academic and practices around the world. The formation of New York 5 in early 70s, led by Peter Eisenman, Michael Graves, Charles Gwatney, John Haidu, and Richard Meyer, brought about some provocative thoughts. The intent of the group was to discuss and critique the work of architecture, all of them associated with teaching and practice of architecture, especially houses. All 5 of them believed in rejection of representational historicist imagery and ornamentation with spatial and geometric complexity, transparency and ambiguity, and representation as a means for architectural interpretation. The New York 5 was originally called as Whites. Michael Graves' work loosely related to New York 5 in later years, but he initially engaged with quotational elements, layered facades, conceptual homage to design program of White. In the later period, he moved away from purist and cubist syntax by influence of pop culture in later practices. This house remained one of the critical work of the time. The static cubic volume set in dynamic state by letting long bridge and stair takes you on the first floor. The cubic volume is tentative due to its nature of skin and structure, which are maneuvered to form a layered fenestration and spaces. Eisenman's work lies in syntactic model of interrelationship of tectonic without external reference. It has a dialectic relation between writing, that is transformation, and reading, that is implicit and explicit relation. It denies any concession of space experience in traditional sense, that is static perspective, but rather clinching the thought that sway between how it is written and how it is to be read. Architectural meaning is suspended between these dialectics of thoughts. Eisenman's work represents a radical confession of faith in an autonomous architecture, which is entirely free itself from criteria of habitability. The emergence of form is solely depending on the formal process and methodical transformation or a systematic decomposition of cube. Eisenman developed house series by numbers, hence defying any associational value in its conceptualization. Architecture is declutched from its metaphorical association and dwelt on self-absorbed metaphor of space. The House 6 is perhaps the most celebrated house among architectural fraternity. The series moves in transformation of cubic volume left with spaces that are incidentally called habitable spaces with compromised functionality. The attention of that generation of architects were attracted by the rigidly white building arose from combination of mathematical play of mass and void with an artistic manipulation of or aesthetics, almost like an extension of Corbusier's villa, and programmatically remote from everyday building practice. Charles Gwatney works dwelt on whiteness that allows stark contrast of light and shadow, solid and void. It heightens the purity of visual form. Richard Meyer's work demonstrated the criteria of program, site, and circulation within Corbusian syntax. The external references are minimal. However, inner organizations are complex through exaggeration of program by means of ramps, vistas, levels, and connect to outside. Anthony Ames' house, a depiction of familiar object entangled into a landscape, physically as well as culturally. His work dwells on juxtaposition, superimposition, and ambiguity of scale. His work is like an artist on canvas, allowing multiple readings, fostered through compelling observation. The house is a parody of Villa Savoy, recontextualized and juxtaposed with newer landscape. The familiar pilotis and ribbon windows are not escapable from one's scanning. Rather, it compels a viewer to imagine the house as a canvas of time representation. His drawing uses Corbusier spectacles, James Stirling watch, and other several objects of famous architects and bring about composition of melting identity of our time. The house designed by Richard Neutra brings about compositional qualities of form that resonates the need of the client, fostered with streamlined aesthetics. The plan of the house is enveloped by screened terraces and larger void. The stark white composition of horizontality stands out in wooded context of sight. This house is designed by Australian modernist Harry Sidler. The house daringly exploits the site with double cantilevered steel frame. The plan constitutes composition of various functions imagined out of structural and formal quality of house. The program is almost becoming homogeneous and singular, yet architecturally this house reinforces the modernist manifesto in newer forms of construction. I hope that the lecture brings about understanding of variation in modernism in early 60s till late 70s and its impact of articulating how house forms of newer society emerged and ready for such experimentation, where meanings and context are secondary to the primacy of architect's desire. In the next lecture, we shall discuss the contextual gesture that were imagined within modernist idioms. Thank you.